So, point 3, yom, day, never refers to more than thousands of years. So we can't have millions and billions of years. Stambaugh. It appears that yom was part of a variety of formulae, some of which could denote a long time. The plural use of yom is the communicator of long time. This does not contradict the previous sections because in the illustrations that follow, yom stands in a syntagmatic relationship that is different from the ones already discussed. The singular use tends to denote a short time. Once this is examined, the interpreter should be able to define contexts in which yom would clearly communicate longer lengths of time. It's all about context. Careful reading, but you don't have to be a genius, an Einstein. Just read it. It would appear from the historical genre used in the Old Testament that yom in the plural tends to be part of a formula communicating a specific length of time. Gershon Brin observes that yom is used for naming eras in biblical times. This kind of formula is a personal name or title attached to the era. Examples of this can be seen in Genesis 5 and 10. Days of X, the name of the patriarch, days of Abraham, for example. The names within the genealogies could be used to designate the era in which that person lived. This is also frequently observed in the book of Judges, where we read of the days of X, the name of the king or the judge, and the author states how long it lasted. This formula can also be found in the prophetic genre, following the same pattern, with one observable exception. Micah 7:15 is the exception where, instead of a name, this phrase is used when you came out of Egypt. Well, that's easy to figure out. Not a lot of time, really. The reference points to the future when God will show his power to the Gentile nations, so the reference to the days of signifies the period of the Exodus from Egypt. The use of yom in the plural signifies a set length of time, and the syntagmatic relationships within the context determine how long it is. There are occurrences of yom in the plural that appear to cover a period of thousands of years by using two Hebrew words for a great length of time. They are of old, qedem, and everlasting, ôlam. Isaiah 51:9 illustrates the first word as it says, awake, as in the days gone by, as in the days, generations of old. The context is a metaphorical reference to God's work of creation, and this is the same kind of work which will be undertaken for his people. These same words also appear in Jeremiah, Micah, Psalm, to illustrate that humans had inhabited the earth for a long time, by then a period of some 3,000 years, according to Genesis 5 and 10. The second Hebrew word is often used of eternal. It too designates a long time period when combined with the plural yom. These can be observed in Isaiah 63 and Amos 9. The Isaiah passage refers to the time of Moses. Then his people recalled the days of old and the days of Moses and his people. The prophet Amos points back to the days of David. In that day I will raise up the fallen booth of David and wall up its breaches. I will also raise up its ruins and rebuild it as the days of old. So the interpreter should conclude that the use of yom in the plural may signify a long period of time when specified by the context. This can also be demonstrated by the use of two Hebrew words for a long time, translated of old or everlasting. It should be noted, however, that the context is one of history, and when the readers used these words for a long time, they did so with an eye to human history that began in Genesis 1:26. The observation can be made from the plural use of yom that the time covered is of the order of a few thousand years, not orders of magnitude larger. Therefore, it does not appear that the context of Genesis will allow the interpreter to fit what could possibly be billions of years into the singular yom in the events of creation, as is alleged by some. There you go. So, Exodus 20, 8 to 11, refers to 24-hour creation days. Some people say Well, no, this is referring to billions of years. Well, also the day in the creation account in Genesis is the same word translated day in Exodus 28 to 11. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do your work. Can't be 6 billion years days. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work. Well, how? You don't do days? You don't do any work for 7 billion days? Years? Days? What? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Of course, he also created the heavens, but that's not in the context here. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. These verses in Exodus confirm the literal 24-day time period of creation. Otherwise, the understanding of the fourth commandment quoted above could not be for Jews to rest for a day, but for millions of years. Furthermore, at the conclusion of each day's creation is a statement the same or similar to, then there was evening and morning of the first day, indicating a literal 24-hour day with an evening and a morning. C. Day equals age theory contradicts geological age theory, which it falsely attempts to support. Years ago, Darwin comes out. People, Christians, say, well, we got to make this look scientific, so let's make the Bible conform to Darwin. Wow. They're not too good about discovering that God is the author of the Bible. Who's Darwin? In any case, the geological theory of ages, reference the accepted order of fossils in the rocks, does not coincide with the sequence of the Genesis 1 narrative if the days are to be taken as ages. The Genesis account has the following creation sequence: heavens, space, and earth in its formless stage, light, firmament, expanse, the heavenly space for above earth, dry ground and seas, plant life, stars and planets, day and night, water animals, and fish and birds, land animals, Adam and Eve. Day equals age theory would not enable life on earth to survive. Dr. Ball says, a repetitive phrase given again and again in the creation account is Scripture is the evening and the morning. So, creation days are literal 24-hour days. The word yom is used in the Hebrew, and unless there is a specific contextual arrangement, it always means a literal day. The reason the days of creation had to be literal is because of the interrelationship of life. You can have animals living without food or protection. Plant, insect life, animal life, and non-living elements of nature, such as light, rain, air, and so on, are interdependent upon one another such that they need to be in creation at the same time for another to survive, so it can only be 24-hour days. Dr. Ba, it was on day number 3 that God created the botanical life forms. It was not until day number 4 that God created the stellar heavens, the sun and the moon, to create the ability for photosynthesis. If the earth were enshrouded in a cloud of darkness, there would not have been the ability for photosynthesis until the sun and more of the stellar heavens were visible and usable as light sources. In a matter of 48 hours, most of the botanical life forms would be dead. In a matter of 28 days, all of them would be dead without the ability to design by the Lord that the stellar bodies give for photosynthesis upon the earth. Even if that were not the case, it was not until day number 6 that God created the insects that are so very important to the procreation of most of these botanical life forms. There is such an interplay of the life forms that the days of creation have to be literal 24-hour days. E. Day equals age theory contradicts Bible's teaching that death followed sin and did not come before it. Right? The day age theory accepts as real the existence of death before sin, in direct contradiction to the biblical teaching that death is a divine judgment on man's dominion because of man's sin, Romans 5:12. Thus, it assumes that suffering and death comprised an integral part of God's work of creating and preparing the world for man. And this, in effect, pictures God as the sadistic ogre, not as a biblical God of grace and love. 11. Let there be signifies something which has just been created, where there was nothing like it before. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. It didn't say light-bearing bodies, did it? And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. James Stambaugh states, throughout the Genesis 1 narrative, God speaks and something happens as a result. These commands are characterized by the wording, let there be. One such command appears in verse 3, light. 2 in verse 6, expanse and divided waters. 2 in verse 9, waters gathered in appearance of dry ground. 1 in verse 11, sprouting plants. 1 in verse 14, luminaries. There you go. Light was before the luminaries. 2, stars and suns and so on. 2 in verse 20, sea creatures and flying animals. 1 in verse 24, land animals. And 1 in verse 26, man. All, with the exception of 1, are used in the sense of God speaking to his creation. In the exception, one gets the sense of one member of the Godhead speaking to the other. Let us make man. This command, let there be, is known as the adjussive or command mood. God used this command consistently in the first 6 instances to refer to something brought into existence that did not previously exist. Regardless of whatever these commands signify, ex nihilo, out of nothing, or de novo, something new, they represent a fundamental change in the object that is created. This includes the sun, moon, and stars on the 4th day, after light was created. Continue in Genesis 1:3-5. God creates light, and the earth experiences evening and morning for the first time without light emanating bodies. And what a friend I've been arguing with just misses that. D. Russell Humphreys. Thermonuclear fusion reactions begin, forming heavier nuclei from lighter ones and liberating huge amounts of energy. As a consequence, an intense light illuminates the interior, breaking through to the surface and ending the darkness there. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. So as the nuclear compression continues, gravity becomes so strong that light can no longer reach the surface, redarkening it. Psalm 104:2. Covering thyself with light as with a cloak, in context appears to refer to day 1. This suggests to me that at this point the Spirit of God moving or hovering over the surface of the waters, Genesis 1:2, becomes a light source in the same way as he will again become a light source at a future time, Revelation 21:23, 22:5. This would give the deep a bright side and a dark side, thus dividing light from darkness and inscribing a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness, Job 26:10. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So there were no light-bearing bodies at that time. Yet God creates light, and it goes where he's declared it to go, or sovereignly controls it. The deep speeds up its rotation as the compression continues, as a whirling ice skater speeds up when she brings her arms inward. We can imagine a reference point on the surface rotating around to the dark side and continuing farther around to the bright side again, marking off evening and morning. Rough calculations show that all of the events from the beginning to this point had to take place in a very short time, much less than a year. To calculate the time exactly would go beyond the frontiers of modern relativity. But I suspect that a modern clock, if it could survive on the surface of the deep, would register about 24 hours from the instant of creation to the end of day 1. Henry Morris states, verse 3 is the first record of God's